Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Mem Gimel. I will remind everyone that the Zoom is starting up again this coming Sunday, August 22nd, the 14th of Elul. So if you want to join the Zoom, you're welcome to join. All the information is on our website. You can find a link to the Zoom there. There's a WhatsApp group that you can join to get updates. So please join our Zoom. You can come once in a while. You can come every day. There's also a nice community of people that learn together every day. So I recommend it. Even on a one-off. Okay, we are now going to start. Our main topic today is going to be lulav, and we'll get to rava, overriding Shabbat. When do they override Shabbat? Why is that the case? Why is this no longer true in our day? And that's going to be the main topic of conversation. So we started yesterday we were on the Mishnah, lulav, arava, shisha, v'shiva, depending on, right, if the first day of Yantif falls on Shabbat, then you do the mitzvah of lulav on that day, even though it's Shabbat. Any other day falls on Shabbat, you don't do it. Arava is the opposite. It's only if it's the last day. Then we said, the Gemara asked, Amai tiltu ba'amu v'litchei Shabbat. I don't understand what the issue is. It's just a muktzah issue. It should override Shabbat very easily. To which we said this famous line, Amar Rabba, Gzera Shem Yitzlena b'yado v'yelech etzel baki lumod v'yavirenu arba mo b'reshut harabim. We're worried that what will happen? Somebody might carry the lulav to go learn how to shake it, just like by Megillah and just like by shofar, where we don't allow it. Another case, by the way, if you remember, in Psachim Samach Tet, Amud Aleph, we had the same issue, right? These are the most famous ones that are always mentioned when we talk about Seir Derabah. There also, we saw about Haza'ah. Why don't you do sprinkling of the Paraduma waters on Shabbat? If you need to do the Korban Pesach, wouldn't you be able to allow it? And in fact, we say we don't allow it, okay? Again, because of Seir Derabah. It's a word you might carry it. So the Gemara asks then, if you're really worried someone's going to carry it, then the obvious question is, Ihachi Yom Rishon Nami, then also on the first day we shouldn't allow it. So what are the answer? Rishon Hatkinu Rabbanim Bebeito. Oh, remember we saw in the Mishnah, on the first day they told everyone, don't come to the temple with your lulav, do it in your house. And therefore there's no concern because it's all done in people's houses, and therefore there's no worry if someone's going to carry it. So now they say, wait a minute. That was only after the rabbi saw it came lidei sakana. But even before that, they were taking it on the first day. So what are they? So kodem takana ma'ika lememar. So before they instituted the people should take it in their houses, and people, right, we already saw it. People bring it to the temple before Shabbat. So you see that they would take it on Shabbat. Ella, Rish, and they were, there was a concern. What if I forgot to bring my lulav? Maybe I'd carry it to the Bein HaMikdash. So, Ela Rishon de'itim in a Torah. But, so they say like this. Since the first day is from a Torah bigvulin, meaning even in outside of the Bein HaMikdash, therefore, lo gazru b'hu Rabbanan. The rabbis didn't make the gzera. In other words, the rabbis said, we're worried you're going to take it. On the other hand, we have a mitzvah d'oraita. The mitzvah d'oraita, in the temple, the mitzvah was every day. But still, what they say, we're not going to allow it all the days, but we will allow it on day number one, because day number one, even outside the temple, is a mitzvah. And therefore, we would say, bigvulin. So therefore, lo gazru rabbanan, the rabbi said, fine, we won't be worried that people will carry it. We'll allow it because we want to be able to allow people to fulfill the mitzvah on day number one. Very important day. So there, right, since it's also an obligation outside of the temple, therefore, it must be supremely significant. We'll allow it and not worry about people carrying. So now they say, wait a minute. If the first day is so important, then nowadays, why don't we take a lulav on the first day when it falls on Shabbat? So we say, Anan, which is talking about us in Bavel, in Babylonia. Lo yadina b'kfiyah diyarcha. We don't really know exactly what day. That's why we have 2 days of Yantif. We don't know exactly what day is the 15th. So therefore, we don't know exactly what day is going to be that day that we're going to override. That's why we don't let. If we really knew, then we would. To which the Gemara asked the obvious question. So inu diada b'kfiyah diarche, those who know exactly what day is Tepav, like people living in Israel, litchu, it should override. To which the Gemara says, a very surprising answer, inachinami, it does override. Okay, in fact, for the people living in Israel, they take the lulav on the first day of the Chag when it falls on Shabbat. Why do I say this is very surprising? It's not so surprising. It sounds logical. It's surprising because nobody does this. So hold off. At the very end of the daf, we're going to reject this, really in tomorrow's daf, but we'll get to it today. So right now, we assume that in the time of the temple, it overrode Shabbat. Once there's no longer a temple and we no longer know when exactly the holiday is outside of Israel, therefore, we're not going to let it override the first day, right? It doesn't override Shabbat the first day, but it does in Israel because they know exactly what day it is. And here they're going to further prove it. The one Mishnah says, one said that was our Mishnah. When it falls out on Shabbat, everybody brings the lulav to Harabayit, to the Temple Mount. Utnan idach, and there was another Mishnah that said lebeit hakneset, said they brought it to the shul. And we explained that when did they bring it to the shul? In the times of the temple. Only in the times of the temple, we explained that they brought it to shul. Why? Because we're influenced by what we know to be the case, that nobody brings it to shul when nowadays, once the temple's destroyed, but they're assuming, no, maybe they do bring it when the temple's destroyed, even on Shabbat, on the first day, when the first day falls on Shabbat. In which case they say, let's look at these two sources. One says they brought it to the temple mount, one says they brought it to shul. What's the difference? Not people who are, going on Aliyah Regel versus other people, but Shema Mina, kamazman she'beit hamikdash kayam, kamazman she'ein beit hamikdash kayam. That's like the easier way to explain it, right? Which is, they bring it to shul when there's no longer a temple. They bring it to the temple when there's a temple, which means that they're bringing it to the shul, even on Shabbat. And as they would bring it, obviously, before Shabbat, that was what the Mishnah said. Remember, everyone brought their lulav and put it in a special place so that they know which one was theirs. So, Shema Mina, from here you can infer it must be they did it in Israel. And then you would have to say that Mishnah is only in Israel, which makes sense. The Mishnah was written in Israel. They would bring it to shul. Okay, now, again, as I promised, we're going to reject all this and go back to the way we originally understood that Mishnah Mishnah is only talking about during the time of the temple, and it really doesn't override Shabbat, but even in Israel, but we'll get back to that later. So now we made an assumption before that the first day is by Torah law, taking a lulav, even outside the temple. So where do we get this from? Titania. Ulekachtem, we're going to darshan this pasuk again, different parts of this verse. Some of this is repeat of things we've seen. Ulekachtem, right? Lekachtem, lachem, take for you on the first day. So we're going to darshan those 4 words. Ulekachtem, shetei lekicha biyad kol echad ve'echad. Everybody needs to take their own lulav. It's not a mitzvah that one person can fulfill for everyone else. Lachem, for yourselves, that means misha lachem, from something you own. Seen this many times. Lotzi et hasha'ul ve'et hagazul, not one that's borrowed, not one that's stolen. Bayom, do it during the day. Fa'afilu b'Shabbat, that teaches you right on that day, the Yom HaRishon, even if it falls on Shabbat. Rishon, why does it say Bayom HaRishon? Rishon, first, afilu b'gvulin, comes to teach you even outside of the temple. HaRishon, the fact that it says afilu b'Shabbat, it says B'yom harishon, b'yom afilu b'Shabbat, harishon, the first day, teaches you melamed she'eno doche ela yom tov harishon bilvad. Only the first day of Yantif is going to override Shabbat. Okay, that's what we learned from that pasuk. So now, Amar, we're now going to go into a few things about that braita. B'yom va'afilu b'Shabbat. 1 minute. Michti tiltu ba'almahu itzrich kra l'mishrei tiltu. What would be the issue on Shabbat? We said that it's muktzah, but the fact that it's muktzah is a derabanan. We don't need a pasuk to tell you that you can do a doraita and it overrides a rabbinic law. The rabbinic law wasn't in existence at the time the Torah was written. So why are we saying, even though it's muktzah, you can take it on Shabbat, but that's what the pasuk's telling you. So what did they answer? Right, because it's tiltul ba'alma, it's your kral mishrei tiltul, you need a pasuk to say on a Torah level you can use something that's muktzah when muktzah is only rabbinic. So Amarava lo nitzrucha ela lemachshirei lulav va'aliba dehaitana detanya lulav v'chol machshirav dochim et haShabbat divrei Rabbi Eliezer. What do we say? The Braita says that lulav and all of the preparatory stuff for lulav is also override Shabbat. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. The Braita continues and says, "My time de Rabbi Eliezer." Where does he get this from? And that's exactly from our pasuk. Amar kra bayom va'afilu b'Shabbat. The pasuk says, Bayom. Bayom comes to teach you even on Shabbat, meaning we're not talking about muktzah overrides. That obviously is overridden by Shabbat. But what we want to say is, even if, let's say, your lulav is still attached to your tree on Shabbat, you're allowed to cut it off the tree. Anything in preparation for the mitzvah also overrides Shabbat. This is the famous from Rabbi Eliezer de Mila of the seventh parak of Shabbat. Can't now remember what parak it is of Shabbat, if I'm wrong about that. But in any case, maybe the 17th parak, I forget. Rabbi Eliezer de Mila is a very, very famous parak. For some reason, it eludes me the second, which number parak. But it's the chapter that talks about Milah and all the machshirim, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is doches Shabbat. You're allowed to do all sorts of preparatory things for Brit Milah, whereas the rabbis disagree and say, no, just the Brit Milah itself overrides Shabbat, but not preparatory things. Like, let's say you forgot to bring the knife. Can you bring the knife? So according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's a machshir. You're allowed to bring the knife. According to the rabbis, you can't bring the knife on Shabbat. So, right, all the preparatory stuff has to be done before. So now, my time to Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reason for Rabbi Eliezer? So we just saw that. That's Bayom Afilu b'Shabbat. Rabbanan. So what do Rabbanan do with Bayom? In other words, what they're basically saying is that Braita that we saw before, that Drasha Bayom Afilu b'Shabbat is only Rabbi Eliezer. So what do the rabbis do with it? Can have that classic ping pong. Rabbanan, hi b'yom my avdele. What do they do with it? It comes to teach you lulav is a mitzvah during the day and not at night. So where does Rabbi Eliezer learn this from? His bayom is busy. So nafkale misefet dikai. Learned it from the end of the pasuk. Usmachtem lefnei Hashem elokechem shivat yamim. Should rejoice before God 7 days. Notice it says again days. He would say from there we get days and not nights. And the first day in the verse is teaching you even on Shabbat. So now they say, okay, well, if Shivat Yamim below Leilot, so Rabbanan, why wouldn't you learn it from Yamim? And then your Bayom is still free. And then what do you do with that? So Rabbanan say, if we learned it from Yamim, Hava Amina Leilaf Yamim is Sukkah, we would have thought to learn Yamim from Sukkah, because Sukkah Teshvu Shivat Yamim also. And Malahalan Yamim Ba'afilu Leilot, there the days mean days and nights, right? When I say day, I don't always mean days. Sometimes day includes night. So if I'm going to learn it from the word Yamim, well, that's the same word that appears Yamim by Sukkah, and it's talking about the same 7 days. And you might think, just like, right, Sukkah is Afilu Leilot, Avka, maybe also Lulav, Yamim Ba'afilu Leilot. And therefore, they learn it from Bayom, which is different from Sukkah, which says Yamim, and not from the word Yamim, where Rabbi Eliezer learns it from. So now they say, Sukkah gufu minala. Where do we learn Sukkah that it's even at night? You have to sit in the Sukkah. You might say this is obvious because if you have to sleep in the Sukkah, obviously we're talking about at night, but they want to kind of throw it up in the air and say, maybe it's not so clear. Where would we exactly learn it from? And what's funny about this is we just said, you might have thought, Yamim, you learn from Lulav from Sukkah. This one is going to say, we learn it from Sukkah. And the question is, where do we learn Sukkah from? And one of the suggestions is going to be, let's learn it from Lulav, which we know is only during the day. So it's kind of a little bit cyclical because that was the whole question. Is Lulav only during the day or also at night? So here's our Braita. D'tanu Rabbanan, b'Sukkot tishvu shivat yamim. It's going to be a little bit of a maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe that, until they finally conclude. So it starts off with Sukkot tishvu shivat yamim. They already tell you the answer. Yamim va'afilu leilot. It's night, it's days and nights. But now they throw it up in the air and they suggest maybe not. Yamim va'afilu leilot. Oh, eno ele yamim v'lo leilot. You want to say it's days, including nights, but maybe it's only days and not nights. Vidinhu, and you can make a logical argument for it. Ne'emal kan yamim v'ne'emar b'lulav yamim. This is where we get to, right? We say by lulav also yamim, right? Now they're using the reverse. We were trying to say maybe you learn lulav from sukkah. Here they're saying maybe you learn sukkah from lulav, assuming that lulav is only during the day. Ne'emar b'lulav yamim, malahalan yamim v'lo leilot, afkan yamim v'lo leilot. Maybe we learn it because it says sukkot tishvu shivat yamim, and it says usmachtem lefnei Hashem shivat yamim. Just like lulav is only during the day, maybe sukkah would only be during the day. Or alternatively, you could say, Ne'emal kan yamim v'ne'emar b'miluim yamim. The 8 days that they prepared, they sanctified the temple on the 8th day, right? Vayom Shmini, that's Parshat Shmini. They sanctified the temple, right? That 8 day, there were 7 days of preparation. Those 8 days, it says, Upetach Ol Moed Tishvu, sit in front of the Ol Moed, Yomam Valayla Shivat Yamim. The Kohanim were supposed to sit there 7 days. Ushmartem et mishmeret Hashem v'lo tamutu kikein tzuveti. Okay, and you should protect, right, the temple, the Mishkan. So now, because it says there Yamim, and how many days was it? It was Yeshev Yomam Valayla, Malahalan Yamim Va'afilu Leilot, Afkan Yamim Va'afilu Leilot. Let's learn it from the Miluim, because there it talks about days. Okay, it doesn't exactly say Yamim, it says Yomam, but it says Yomam Valayla. There it was day and night. Therefore, here it should be day and night. When Rabbi Eliezer had his opinion, by the way, about the 14 meals. So he had his proof. Where do we get 14 meals? Because people normally eat every day, right? Teshvu ke'en tadulu, the way you normally eat, you eat 2 meals a day. So likewise in the Sukkah, you have to eat 2 meals a day. In the Yerushalmi there, it proved it from the Miluim, from this Gzera Shava that we're going to see in a minute, of Teshvu, and they proved from there, that's where Rabbi Eliezer gets the 14 meals, because there it was day and night. Also here, you have to eat day and night. It's the same Gzera Shava, but they use it for a different halacha. That was a halacha that we don't accept in the end. The Rabbi Eliezer requires 14 meals. We don't accept it. This halacha, we do accept that you have to sit in the sukkah day and night. Could be there were different traditions about what this Gzera Shava is used for. Okay, but now they're going to say, we don't know yet about the Gzera Shava they're going to talk about, but we'll get to it in a minute. It says by Miluim, days and nights. So therefore, we'll learn the same thing for sukkah. So again, we don't know which one. Should we learn it from Lulav, Shivat Yamim, or should we learn it from the right, which is only day, or should we learn it from the Miluim, which was day and night? So now they say, well, near Elami Domeh. Let's see what it's most similar to. Danim davar shemitzvato kol hayom, midavar shemitzvato kol hayom. Miluim and sukkah are both things that are constant, right? They're all day long. You could eat all day long. You're obligated in sukkah. You could, right? You're supposed to sit all day long and all night in front of the Mishkan. But lulav is a momentary mitzvah. You do it and you're finished. That's it. You don't have to do it all day. It's true, some people carried it with them all day, but that's not the mitzvah. Oh, or alternatively, you could say again, kalech l'derech zeh. Ta'anim davar shemitzvato l'dorot, midavar shemitzvato l'dorot. Let's learn something that's for generations from something that's for generations. The Miluim was a one-time event. It's not something continuous. So maybe we should learn Sukkah from Lulav because they're more similar. And I would think Sukkah and Lulav are much more similar than Miluim. It's something totally different. Talmud Lama, therefore it says, Teshvu. Here's our Gzera Shava I mentioned. Teshvu l'Gzera Shava. Ne'amar kan Teshvu, b'Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. You're supposed to sit Petach Ol Moed by the entrance to the sanctuary. And therefore, from the Gzera Shava, we learn that just like the Miluim was day and night, also Sukkah is day and night. This again builds that theory about the connection of Sukkah to Mikdash. Okay. Again, in this case, Lulav is a little bit on the outs. Normally, Lulav is connected to Mikdash. Here's Sukkah. So now they say, all right, okay, that's the end of that section. Now we want to get to Arava Shiva Ketzad. So again, that was all to prove. Let's just go back for a quick minute. We started with, how do we know that Lulav overriding Shabbat? Why doesn't it override all the other days? Because of Zera Derabba. Why does it override on the first day? Because that day is D'oraita, even in the time of the Mikdash, even outside the temple, it was D'oraita. And even nowadays, it's D'oraita. So why doesn't it override D'oraita? Because we don't know the Kfiyat Diarcha. We don't know when the new moon is. But what about in places where they do, like Israel? Oh, it should override. That's where we are at this point, right? Then we said, where do we get this from? And we brought this drasha, and from there we got a little sidetracked into issues of the drasha, that by Yom Afilu b'Shabbat maybe is only Rabbi Eliezer, and it's talking about Machshirim, and not about Muktzah, because Muktzah doesn't need a pasuk about. And then we said, well, where do the rabbis get, right? What do they do with Bayom v'lo b'layla? And then we got into the whole thing about Bayom v'lo b'layla, and where do we learn it from? Now we want to go back to Arava Shiva. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing by Lulav, the same kind of question. Arava b'Shiva, b'Shvi'i, my time adachet Shabbat. So why does it override Shabbat on the seventh day? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kedei lefarsema she'imena Torah. We want people to know that Arava is a mitzvah from Torah law. Again, what's the mitzvah of Arava? We're going to see a little bit today, a debate about it, but basically they would surround the Mizbeach with Aravot, And then, right, they would put them up. We're going to see it's called zukfim. They would stand up aravot around the altar to decorate it every day of the holiday. Then they would go around one time every day. And on the seventh day, they would go around 7 times, holding, now we don't really know, we're going to see today, there's a debate, were they holding aravot or were they holding lulavim? Okay. So we're now going to say we want people to know this min Torah. Now, this is a little tricky because where did we learn it from? We saw there were 2 sources for it. One was to say arvei nachal, plural, one for the lulav, one for the arava. That's really from the Torah, but it's not explicitly written in the Torah, and that's why it would need strengthening. The other option was it's halacha l'moshe misinai. But even halacha l'moshe misinai is close to saying it's from the Torah because it's an old tradition. It's almost like a doraita. So you can even explain it that way, right? That it's lefarsama, that it's almost like a doraita. So they say, oh, if that's the case, why don't we also have lulav override Shabbat to teach everyone that it's by Torah law? So they say lulav, right? And what's the Torah law? That in the mikdash, you had to take it all 7 days. So they say, no, because lulav gzera mishum de Rabba. No, we have the gzera of Rabba about the lulav, and that's why. So ihachi arava nami nigzor. Why don't we say arava? We're worried people are going to carry it into Rashut Harabim. So we say arava shluchei beitim ma'itela lulav lakol masul. Arava was something only the beitim did. They would bring the aravot for the kohanim to put around the altar. They know not to carry it. Once you have something that's lulav that everybody does, then you have much more of a concern that people are going to carry it. Okay, so arava is more limited in terms of who's doing it, and therefore we're not worried. Also, it's a matter of who's the ones who are doing it. They're the trustworthy people that we know won't really make mistakes or less likely to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So then they say, okay, well, if arava, it's the shluchei beit din who are doing it in the time of the temple, then what are we worried about? Well, then why only on the 7th day? We should allow the mitzvah of arava whenever Shabbat falls out on any day of the week, not only if it falls out on Hoshana Rabbah. So what do they say? People will think that lulav is less important, right? They'll say, oh, look, arava overrides Shabbat every day of, right? And whatever day of the holiday it comes out on. And lulav doesn't. We're worried people will kind of say, oh, maybe lulav's not so important. So now, okay, it's like lulav. So why the 7th day and why not the 1st day? Lo muchamilte, it won't be noticeable. Amre lulavu dekadache. They'll say, oh, it's because Shabbat was overridden for the lulav, and that's why we took the arava. But it wouldn't have the same effect as saying arava is a mitzvah in and of its own right. If we do it on its own day, everyone will know, oh, arava must be a really important mitzvah from the Torah, and that's how we'll get our point across. So then they say, so why the 7th day? Why don't you just choose any random day? No, because normally when you pick 1 out of 7, you're either going to pick 1 or you're going to pick 7. Pick a day that stands out from the others. So if it's not going to be 1, it'll be 7. Right? It's strange that they don't offer the answer of on the 7th day, they did 7 rounds around and it was more important mitzvah. It was Hoshana Rabbah, right? You could have come up with, right? Remember, Hoshana Rabbah is not a Yom Tov. It's not like the 7th day of Pesach, which is a Yom Tov. The Yom Tov at the end of Sukkot is after the holiday of Sukkot, not connected to this at all. That's Shmini Atzeret. Again, it's somewhat connected to Sukkot, but not exactly. But here we're talking about Hoshana Rabbah. It's not exactly Yom Tov, but it is the last day. There's something to be said for that. So here comes the question we asked before by Lulav. So nowadays it also should override. So again, the answer, right? We don't know exactly what day it is, therefore it doesn't override anymore. But remember, in those days, right, they used to determine when the new moon was, and then they would send messengers, and they would get across, and then in Babel, they wouldn't necessarily know, and that's why they kept 2 days, and that's why we continually keep 2 days in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel. So now they say, okay, what about Inu Diade B'Kviyah Diarche Lidchu? What about the ones in Israel? It should override. So we're going to have a few answers. Ki'ata Bar Hadya Amal, when Bar Hadya came from Israel, he said, Lo ikla. It actually never happens because at some point they determined when the calendar became set. And he says, absolutely never happens. And this is true nowadays. Hoshana Rabbah never falls on Shabbat. That's why it doesn't override, because it never happens, right? It's not because theoretically, if it were to happen, it would override, but it just doesn't happen. This is very fascinating. When Ravin came and all the people who normally brought the Torah of Israel to Babel, right? They were people who went down from Israel to Babylonia. It actually has happened and it doesn't override. So that doesn't resolve the question because it has happened once in a while and it does override. Interesting that one said never happened, one said it does happen, right? What the reality is, we don't really know. The Elakashya. So in fact, according to Ravin and all the Nechute, it's difficult. Clearly the Gemara is siding with them because it's one person, Barhedya, versus Ravin and all the Nechute, right? I'm sure it wasn't all the Nechute, bit of an exaggeration, but maybe they're trying to make a point. So it really could happen, they say. So therefore, why doesn't it override? So he comes Rav Yosef with an answer, and Abai is going to question him from three different sources. Amar Rav Yosef, Man le'malanda arava b'netila dilma b'zkifa. You think the mitzvah of arava is to take the aravot in your hand? No, it's to put them around the altar. Why doesn't it override Shabbat nowadays? Very simply, because we no longer have an altar, we no longer have a temple. It's not a relevant halacha once the temple is destroyed. So that's what Rav Yosef's answer is. So here comes a bunch of questions. Eitivei Abai. Abai brings the following sources to contradict. Lulav arava shisha b'shiv'a. Lulav and arava are mentioned right next to each other. My lav ki lulav. Must be arava is like lulav. Ma lulav b'netila af arava b'netila. Must be, we mean taking the lulav and taking the aravot, not putting them around the altar. So they say, no, midi'iria, hakadi'ite, b'haikadi'ite. Yosef answers, no, one, right. Lulav is taking, and arava is putting around the altar. It doesn't prove anything. Second contradiction. B'chol yom mekifim. This is the Mishnah that describes what they would do in the temple with the aravot. B'chol yom mekifim et hamizbeach pam achat, v'oto hayom sheva pa'amim. Okay, so each day they would surround the altar once, and on the seventh day, 7 times. My lav ba'arava, right? What were they surrounding it with? They must have been holding aravot in their hand. So the answer, no, the lulav. Rav Yosef says, no. You could say, who said it was arava? It's lulav. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua ba'arava. But doesn't Rav Nachman say in the name of Rav Ravua with arava? So Amalei, Rav Yosef says, Malach ba'arava, ba'ana mina b'lulav. Okay, very nicely. He says it, but he's an Amora and I'm an Amora. It's not like he's a Tana and I can't disagree with the Tana. He's an Amora, I'm an Amora. I have my opinion. He has his opinion. And I think lulav. He thinks arava. We both have different interpretations of that Mishnah. It's fine, right? But I go with my interpretation that it was lulav and there wasn't a mitzvah arava other than just put it around the altar. Now we're going to see a bunch of people had a whole debate about this. Right nowadays, what do? We do Hoshanot. We go around every day to remember this mitzvah. But what do? We don't hold the aravot. We hold the lulav. So obviously that was the one that was accepted lahalacha, which is actually Rav Yosef's answer. And here we're going to see a bunch of different opinions about it. Other Amoraim who disagreed. Itma, Rabbi Elazar omer b'lulav, Rabbi Shmuel bar Natan amar Rabbi Chanina ba'arava. Another debate about it. V'chein amar Rav Nachman amar Rabbi Ravua ba'arava. He also said arava. Amar le Rava le Rabbi Yitzchak berei de Rabba bar Chana. Rava says to Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabba bar Chana, Bar Uriah ben Torah, you son of Torah. Tava emalach miltam al yata dahava amar avucha. I'm going to tell you something your father said, a great thing your father said. Ha ditnan kol hayom kifim et hamizbeach pam achat, v'oto hayom kifim et hamizbeach sheva pamim. Hachi amar avuch mishmei to Rabbi Elazar. This is what your father said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, belulav. And that seems to be why we hold that it's belulav, okay, because, right, he makes it very clear. And in the end, we hold it's belulav. Okay, so that was question number 2 against Rav Yosef. Question number 3. Eitive. Lulav dochet haShabbat b'tchilat. Lulav dochet haShabbat b'tchilato. The lulav overrides Shabbat at the beginning of the holiday. V'arava b'sofo, and the arava at the end. Pam achat, one time, chal shvi'i shel arava liyot b'Shabbat. Okay, this was in the time of the temple. The 7th day fell on Shabbat. Ve'viu murbiyot shel arava me'erev Shabbat. They brought big, long branches of arava on Erev Shabbat, and they left them in the Azara in order to do the mitzvah. Now, we don't yet know what mitzvah, right? This is obviously going to show the mitzvah is to hold the arava, not only to put it around the altar. V'kiru behem baitusim. Baitusim were like the Karaim. They had different traditions, right? They generally didn't hold by the traditions of the rabbis. And particularly here, they didn't have the tradition that you take the arava on Shabbat, okay, that it overrides Shabbat. So they saw they were doing this. What they do, right? This is a classic debate here, right? We think you shouldn't do it. So what they do, they tried to torpedo their plan. They put them under stones, knowing that the rabbis wouldn't lift the stones on Shabbat because they're muktzah, and therefore they wouldn't be able to access the aravot. Maybe they were also trying to hide them, not so clear, but it seems that it was the issue. They knew the rabbis wouldn't pick up the stones on Shabbat, so they hid them under the stones, and that way the rabbis wouldn't have access to the aravot on Shabbat, and they wouldn't be able to fulfill the mitzvah. What happened though? Lemachal, the next day, he kilu behem amei haaretz. The amei haaretz come. They're not so careful about all halachot. They obviously wanted to do this mitzvah v'arava, that they wanted, but they apparently didn't have an issue with stones on Shabbat. So what they do? Shmatu mitachar avanim. They took them out from under the stones. Vevi'uma kohanim, and the kohanim took them was kafum b'tzidei mizbeach, and they put them around the altar. Lefisha aim. Okay, and this whole story is to teach you. Why did the Baitusim do this? Because they didn't agree that chibut arava. Now, what's chibut arava? Okay, we normally call chibut arava to hit the aravot on the floor that we do on Hoshana Rabbah. Here it seems maybe they even carrying the aravot are dochet Shabbat, right? Notice alma b'netilahi. Therefore, it's not just putting it around the altar; it's also holding the aravot that's part of the mitzvah. So that you get from the source, even though it was interesting, as it says, the kohanim took them and put them around the altar. It doesn't talk about the people holding them, but the assumption is that because it says the Baitusim disagreed with them taking the aravot, right? The assumption here, they assume chabata means holding, and therefore it seems like holding is the mitzvah, and that really, in fact, is a tiyuvta to Rav Yosef. It knocks out his approach. So now we're back to square one, the elanitchu. So it should override Shabbat because you can't say anymore, oh, there's no mitzvah nowadays. There is still a mitzvah nowadays. So kevan anu lo dachinan, inu nami lo dachi. The answer is, well, even though in Israel they know exactly what day it is, and theoretically it should override Shabbat, since we in Babylonia don't, they don't either. We basically want to keep centralization of halacha. If there's something that we don't do, then they don't do it as well. It's an interesting answer. So the Gemara says, back to square one, what about lulav then? But didn't we say in the beginning of the daf that lulav in Israel, where they know it actually does override Shabbat, which we said was strange because we know that's not to be the case. Well, that's because of what starts off in tomorrow's daf. They say, okay, well, in fact, if we're going to say they keep the same halacha for arava, it must be they keep the same halacha for lulav, and therefore even in Israel, lulav doesn't override Shabbat. Okay, we're going to go back and deal with this issue a little bit more tomorrow and finish it up. And anyway, that's our interesting topic for today about what happened here, what changed, why did at some point things would override Shabbat, and they no longer anymore. And the answer really seems to be because of this kfiyah diarcha, which is very interesting because, right, we don't know exactly what day it is, and therefore we don't have it override Shabbat, even though, right, in Israel we do know, and even now in Babel we do know, really. So anyway, it's very interesting. So with that, we'll finish for today. Have a great day.